In the mid-1960s, something incredible happened. A cultural shockwave, born in a still-recovering post-war Britain, just completely took over the entire world. And it wasn't just about the music, not by a long shot. It was about fashion, it was about attitude, it was a whole new kind of youth rebellion. We are talking, of course, about the British invasion.
Okay, picture this. It's February 1964. The Beatles land in America for the very first time. And this quote, this is what greets them. Just absolute, pure chaos. A frenzy of screaming fans. But to really get how we even arrived at this moment, how this was even possible, we've got to rewind things a bit and hop back across the Atlantic. So, our story really kicks off not in the 60s, but back in the 50s, in a Britain that was still kind of dusting itself off from the shadow of World War II. It was a pretty conservative place, very steeped in tradition. And that's when something new, and frankly, a little bit dangerous, started arriving from America. For British teenagers who were growing up in this super rigid, class-divided society, this raw, rebellious American music, wow. It wasn't just a different sound. It was a full-on cultural explosion. It was loud, it was full of energy, and it was pretty much everything their parents' generation was not. And right away, you see this massive split. On one side, you had the official music industry, trying its best to tame rock and roll, to turn it into this wholesome family entertainment. But on the other side, the kids on the street, they had very different ideas. They jumped on this thing called skiffle, which was this do-it-yourself style of music based on American folk. And this was absolutely crucial, because skiffle basically taught an entire generation of British kids that you don't need a big record label. You could make your own music, right then, right there. So while London was busy trying to polish up rock and roll, the real, gritty spirit of the music was absolutely thriving about 200 miles away. Let's go to Liverpool. Now, this was a port city that was pretty economically depressed and, for all intents and purposes, was completely off the cultural map.
Liverpool's isolation turned out to be its secret weapon. It became this kind of musical incubator. The sanitized pop music that was taking over the rest of the country just didn't really land here. Instead, the city's tough, working-class youth, they held on tight to that raw American sound, and a seed was well and truly planted.
273. Just let that number sink in. By the middle of 1961, that's how many active rock and roll groups there were just in Liverpool. This wasn't just a couple of bands playing in garages. This was a full-blown musical explosion, all happening in one city.
This quote, it's from Brian Epstein, the man who would famously become the Beatles' manager, and it just perfectly captures the whole scene. He was describing an early Beatles gig, and he noticed they weren't this polished product at all. They were raw, they were kind of a mess, but they had this undeniable energy. As he put it, something tremendous was happening.
So as all this energy starts to bubble up and spread out from Liverpool, the whole movement really starts to crystallize around two major forces. They looked different, they sounded completely different, and they really represented two very different sides of this new British youth culture.
On one side, you've got the Beatles. Their manager, Brian Epstein, he was a genius at this. He crafted them into this charming, polished package. They were the lovable mop tops that your parents could actually stomach. And on the other side, the Rolling Stones. They were the exact opposite. Cynical, rude, and deliberately pushed as the radical, dangerous alternative.
And of course, their music totally reflected this difference. The Beatles, they came out of that Liverpool scene, creating what became known as the Mersey sound, a blend of super catchy pop hooks with that raw rock and roll energy. The Stones, though, they were part of a very different scene in London that was obsessed with a darker, much more obscure sound, that raw, traditional American blues from artists like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf.
So with these two titans leading the charge and a whole army of other bands right behind them, the stage was finally set. It was time for these British musicians to cross the Atlantic and basically reintroduce America to its own creation.
But what kind of musical landscape were they about to step into? I mean, what was America actually listening to right before this whole British invasion kicked off?
Well, the truth is, American pop music was in a real slump. The raw energy of early rock and roll was pretty much gone, and it had been replaced by all these predictable pop songs and, frankly, silly novelty numbers. The charts were just monotonous. America was bored, and it was the absolute perfect moment for something new and exciting to come along and just break everything open. And this is the great irony of the entire story. You have these British bands who learned everything they knew from listening to American records, and they repackaged that sound with a whole new energy and a new style. They sold America its own music back to itself, and the American audience went absolutely nuts for it, as if they had never heard anything like it before in their lives.
Now, what kicked off as a musical invasion very quickly morphed into something way, way bigger. This wasn't just some fleeting moment. It was a full-on cultural occupation that would totally change the course of popular music forever.
The massive success of the music, it just fueled this huge cultural boom. Suddenly, all eyes were on London. It became the global epicenter of youth culture, of fashion, of art. It was the swingingest city in the world, where a brand new pop aristocracy was now in charge.
And the evolution was just breathtakingly fast. Think about it. In just 3 years, we go from the initial invasion to the Beatles quitting touring altogether to become a studio-only band. Just a year later, they released their revolutionary album, Sgt. Pepper, which changed what a rock album could even be. And by that same year, the cultural center of gravity was already shifting over to San Francisco for the Summer of Love. The pace of change was just insane.
Ultimately, the music itself was transforming. It was moving way beyond simple 3-minute pop songs. Artists started creating conceptual albums with really complex studio techniques, extended solos, and they were bringing in instruments from all over the world. This was a direct challenge to the whole idea of disposable pop music.
So by the end of 1967, that initial frantic wave of the British invasion, it was pretty much over. English bands weren't completely dominating the American charts anymore. But you know what? It didn't even matter. The genie was out of the bottle. They had taken American rock and roll, supercharged it, and turned it into a permanent, undeniable global force.
So, as we look back on all of this, what's the ultimate takeaway? What's the real legacy? Was it the timeless songs, the revolutionary fashion, or was it something even bigger? The powerful idea, proven for the first time on a global scale, that a handful of kids with guitars could actually start a revolution that would genuinely, truly change the world.